We're back here, boom and bust, with my guest, Tal-Or Cohen Montemayor, founder and executive director of CyberWell. Sorry I had to cut you off there, but an important question. Please continue with your thoughts on how the online platforms are responsible or culpable for this anti-Semitic milieu that is happening.
Sure. I think what's important to understand about the current climate is that social media platforms, which have over half of the worldwide internet activity, are the primary vehicle for normalizing hate and distributing it to the masses. And it's not only an issue of hate as in anti-Semitism. We're currently experiencing a wave of normalizing pro-terror content, terrorist symbolism, terrorist sloganism, and actually bringing that forth domestically into Western democracies. And that's happening because of the vulnerabilities of social media platforms and the lack of investment in automation and also the trust and safety space. The trust and safety space is actually the digital policies and the enforcement of those policies that social media platforms have evolved to kind of become this self-governing ecosystem. But we can't leave it up to them because they're not investing in this as their number one priority. And I'll give you a real life example. Recently, the red triangle was spray painted in Union Square in Washington, D.C. with the threat Hamas is coming. Now, the red triangle is a symbol that's meant to target violently targets of Hamas, Israelis, Jews, innocent civilians. That has been taken directly, has migrated from their own terrorist propaganda via Telegram, via social media platforms, has now been disseminated and normalized for millions of people as some kind of symbol of resistance. But in fact, it's meant to be a violent terrorist symbol and is now being used to target Jewish communities and public institutions. It was recently not only sprayed in Washington, D.C., but on a synagogue in Squirrel Hill, which was the community that was attacked in the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. So we see this evolution coming from the online spaces, normalizing violent content, hatred, conspiracy theories, and that translates into real-world harm and violence in the streets and unrest.
So what do you think governments around the world should do? You said that the online platforms aren't capable or are resisting self-policing this properly. So what should regulators and governments do?
So different regulators have taken different approaches. Most recently in Canada, there's the online safety bill that has been passed. There's also the recent EU legislation of the Digital Services Act. And these are the first kind of steps of the regulator that we've seen that are rooted in fines if the social media platforms don't comply and don't share how they're policing their platforms. But I think it does have to take a step beyond that. First of all, the United States obviously is the biggest market in this sense, and we need to see reform in the United States. And there's a huge kind of intellectual challenge there around the free speech doctrine. What people should understand, though, is that there is a difference between free speech and paid speech. There's a difference between free speech and algorithmically charged speech. Okay? It's not the same thing if you're tweeting out something and it's being broadcasted for millions of people because it's being amplified by bots. It's not quite the same thing as going and protesting peacefully. But we have to start thinking of these private companies as platforms that do disseminate ideas, thought, and information in a way that democracies are not used to seeing. We have to confront, the regulator specifically in the United States needs to confront this gap between free speech and algorithmically charged speech and get to places of transparency. And I also want to underscore that the less reform and the less legal guidance and transparency there is around this issue, the more you will have incidents like governments intervening, like we had with the Biden administration in COVID, and telling them to restrict certain types of information. So the gap that we have in policy and the gap that we have, the lacuna that we have in the law around social media and AI actually creates more of a space for government intervention than I think people are aware. So we are interested in creating real regulation and transparency around these issues. And you can look to other industries to get inspiration from that, right? The banks, for example, there are rules about how often you can trade a stock in order not to participate in price manipulation. Why isn't there the same rule around views and engagement on a specific tweet, right? We have bots that are amplifying misinformation and disinformation and driving up the algorithm to share that information just like you would in selling a stock. So the same kind of transparency and safeguards that we've seen in the finance markets and also in food and drug development,
Right.
which has a very high level of requirement of transparency, we could borrow from those
Sure.
areas and start reforming social media and AI, and we should, because it's good for us.